Right, thank you.
Which one to go?
Pieces, both sides begin to the same place.
We are all subject to the fates. But we must all act as if we are not, or die of despair. There is a curious prophecy about this child. She is destined to bring about the end of destiny. But she must do so without knowing what she is doing, as if it were her nature and not her destiny to do it. If she is told what she must do, it will all fail. Death will sweep through all the worlds. It will be the triumph of despair forever. The universes will all become nothing more than interlocking machines, blind and empty of thought, feeling, life.
They were descending. Malcolm felt a lurch in his stomach and clenched his muscles against it, but it only lasted a few moments, and then the aircraft settled on the ground. The engine noise changed, becoming quieter, and then stopped altogether. Malcolm's ears were ringing, but he did hear the hammering of rain against the body of the gyrocopter and heard Lord Asriel's voice above it. "Get out and follow me. Bring the child and bring your bloody rucksack." Alice found a door on her side and scooped up Lyra before scrambling out. Malcolm hauled the rucksack along and got out the same side, into the bitter wind and the teeming rain. "This way," said Lord Asriel, and hurried off. A flash of lightning showed Malcolm a great domed building, walls of stone, towers and treetops. "Is this?" said Alice. "Oxford? This is Radcliffe Square, I think." Lord Asriel was waiting at the entrance to a narrow lane lit by a flickering gas lamp. The rain made every surface shiny. Asriel's black hair glinted like stone. "Let me take the child." Alice handed her over carefully. Lord Asriel's demon, the powerful snow leopard, wanted to see, and he crouched down to let her put her face next to the sleeping child. Malcolm shifted the rucksack awkwardly, and an idea came to him. He'd never managed to give Lyra the little toy he'd made, but perhaps... "Is this Jordan College?" he said. "As you suggested. Come on." He set off down the lane, and after 100 yards or so, he took a key from his pocket and opened a door in the wall on the right. They followed him through into a large garden overlooked by buildings on two sides. In one of them, large Gothic windows were lit, showing shelves of ancient books. Lord Asriel made straight for a corner of the garden under a high stone wall and went along a narrow passage lit, like the lane outside, by a flickering yellow light on the wall. He stopped by a large door set between two elegant bay windows and knocked loudly. Malcolm rummaged at the bottom of the rucksack for the alethiometer in its black velvet cloth. The cloth fell open as he brought it out, and the gold glittered in the dim light. "What's that?" said Asriel. "It's a present for her," said Malcolm, and thrust it in among Lyra's blankets. They heard the sound of a key turning and bolts sliding back, and as thunder crashed overhead, the door opened to show a distinguished-looking man holding a lamp. He peered out at them in astonishment. "Asriel, can that be you? Come inside, quickly." "Put your lamp down, master. On the table. That'll do." "What in the world?" When the master turned back, Lord Asriel put the child in his arms before he could protest. "Secundum legum de refugio scholasticorum, protectionem tegimentumque, huejus collegi, pro filia mea Lyra nomine reposco," Asriel said. "Look after her." "Scholastic sanctuary? For this child?" "For my daughter Lyra, as I said." "She's not a scholar. You'll have to make her into one then, won't you?" "And what about these two?" Asriel turned to look at Malcolm and Alice, sodden, shivering, filthy, exhausted, bloody. "Treasure them," he said. Then he left. It was no good. Malcolm couldn't stand up any longer. Alice caught him and laid him on the Turkish carpet. The master shut the door. In the sudden silence, Lyra began to cry.
It was still dark when someone shook her awake. "Lyra, hush, don't start. Wake up, child." It was Mrs. Lonsdale. She was holding a candle, and she bent over and spoke quietly. "Listen, the master wants to see you before you join Mrs. Coulter for breakfast. Get up quickly and run across to the lodging now. Go into the garden and tap at the French window of the study. You understand?" Fully awake and on fire with puzzlement, Lyra nodded and slipped her bare feet into the shoes Mrs. Lonsdale put down for her. "Never mind washing. That'll do later. Hurry now." The dark quadrangle was still full of the chill night air. Overhead, the last stars were still visible, but the light from the east was gradually soaking into the sky above the hall. Lyra ran into the library garden and stood for a moment in the immense hush, looking up at the stone pinnacles of the chapel, the pearl green cupola of the Sheldon building, the white painted lantern of the library. Now she was going to leave these sights. She wondered how much she'd missed them. Something stirred in the study window, and a flow of light shone out for a moment. She remembered what she had to do and tapped on the glass door. It opened almost at once. "Good girl, come in quickly. We haven't long," said the master, and drew the curtain back across the door as soon as she had entered. "Aren't I going after all?" Lyra asked. "Yes, I can't prevent it," said the master. And Lyra didn't notice at the time what an odd thing that was to say. "Lyra, I'm going to give you something, and you must promise to keep it private. Will you swear to that?" "Yes," Lyra said. He crossed to the desk and took from a drawer a small package wrapped in black velvet. When he unfolded the cloth, Lyra saw something like a large watch or a small clock, a thick disc of brass and crystal. It might have been a compass or something of the sort. "What is it?" she said. "It's an alethiometer. It's one of only 6 that were ever made. Lyra, I urge you again, keep it private. It would be better if Mrs. Coulter didn't know about it. Lord Asriel, but what does it do?" "It tells the truth. As for how to read it, you'll have to learn by yourself. Now go, it's getting lighter. Hurry back to your room before anyone sees you." He folded the velvet over the instrument and thrust it back into her hands. It was surprisingly heavy. Then he put his own hands on either side of her head and held her gently for a moment. She tried to look at him and said, "What were you going to say about Lord Asriel?" He presented it to Jordan College some years ago. He might... Before he could finish, there came a soft, urgent knock on the door. She could feel his hands give an involuntary tremor. "Quick now, child," he said quietly. "The powers of this world are very strong. Men and women are moved by tides much fiercer than you can imagine, and they sweep us all up into the current. Go well, Lyra. Bless you, child. Bless you. Keep your own counsel." "Thank you, Master," she said dutifully. Clutching the bundle to her breast, she left the study by the garden door, looking back briefly once to see the Master's demon watching her from the windowsill. The sky was lighter already. There was a faint, fresh stir in the air. "What's that you've got?" said Mrs. Lonsdale, closing the battered little suitcase with a snap. "The Master gave it me. Can't it go in the suitcase?" "Too late. I'm not opening it now. It'll have to go in your coat pocket, whatever it is. Hurry on down. Don't keep them waiting."
Who are you?
Lyra Silvertongue. What's your name?
I'm Dr. Mary Malone. What do you want?
I want you to tell me about dust. I know you know about it. I can prove it. You've got to tell me.
Dust? What are you talking about?
You might not call it that. It's elementary particles. In my world, the scholars call it Rusakov particles, but mostly they call it dust. They don't show up easily, but they come out of space and they fix on people. Not children much, mostly on grown-ups. And something I only found out today. I was in that museum down the road, and there were some skulls with holes in their heads. There was a lot more dust around them than around this other one that hadn't got that sort of hole in. When's the Bronze Age?
The Bronze Age? Goodness, I don't know, about 5,000 years ago?
Ah, well, they got it wrong then when they wrote that label. The skull with the 2 holes in was 33,000 years old.
Where do you come from? Who are you? What are you? How do you know things like this?
I come from another world. And in that world, there's an Oxford like this, only different, and...
Wait, you come from where?
From somewhere else, not here.
Oh, somewhere else, I see. Well, there you go, see.
And I got to find out about dust because the church people in my world, right, they're frightened of dust because they think it's original sin and it's important, and my father, no, that's not what I meant to say.
just
I'm
calm
doing it
down.
all wrong.
Calm down. What you're talking about, your dust, sounds like something we've been investigating for a while now, and this is too much, I'm too tired.
What's that?
It's Chinese, the symbols of the I Ching. Do you know what that is? They have that in your world?
I don't know everything about my world. Maybe they got this Qing thing there too. What's dark matter?
Dark matter? Dark matter is what my research team is looking for. No one knows what it is. There is more stuff out there in the universe than we can see. That's the point.
And what do you think it is?
Well, we think it's some kind of elementary particle, something quite different from anything discovered so far. But they're very hard to detect. Do you study physics?
Yes, I know a little bit, but not about dark matter.
Well, we're trying to detect this almost undetectable thing among the noise of all the other particles crashing about, and we have found a particle that fits. We call them shadow particles, shadows. And you know what? They're conscious. That's right. Shadows are particles of consciousness. They know we're here. They answer back. And here goes the crazy part. You can't see them unless you expect to, unless you put your mind into a certain state. You have to be confident and relaxed at the same time. And then you look at the cave and...
The cave?
Oh, sorry. The computer, we call it the cave. Once you've linked up to it, if you think, the shadows respond. My colleague was fooling about one day, testing things with the cave, and it was so odd. It didn't make any sense in any way. A physicist would expect to make sense. He got a piece of ivory, just a lump, and there were no shadows with that. It didn't react. But a carved ivory chess piece did. A big splinter of wood off a plank didn't. But a wooden ruler did. They knew what these objects were. Anything that was associated with human workmanship and human thought was surrounded by shadows. And then he got some fossil skulls from a friend at the museum and tested them to see how far back in time the effect went. There was a cut-off point about 30, 40,000 years ago. Before that, no shadows. After that, plenty. And that's about the time, apparently, that modern human beings first appeared.
It's dust. That's what it is. I want to see this cave.
This is it. To see the shadows, you have to be linked up to some electrodes, like for measuring brainwaves.
I want to try it.
Oh, you won't see anything. It's too complicated.
Please. I know what I'm doing.
What in the world is that? A compass? Oh, it's made of gold. Where on earth did you...
I think it does what your cave does. That's what I want to find out. If I can answer a question truly, something you know the answer to and I don't, can I try your cave then?
Oh, we're into fortune telling now. What is this thing?
Please, just ask me a question.
Okay, all right. Tell me what I was doing before I took up this business.
You used to be a nun. I wouldn't have guessed that. Nuns are supposed to stay in their convents forever, but you stopped believing in the church things and they let you leave. This isn't like my world at all, not a bit. Well, that's true, isn't it?
Yes. And you found that out from that?
From my alethiometer. It worked by dust, I think. I came all this way to find out more about dust, and they told me to come to you, so I reckon your dark matter must be the same thing. Now can I try your cave?
Very well. I think I might be dreaming. All right. You're all hooked up. The room is full of shadows. This is the only way we can see them. When you make your mind empty and look at the screen. Off you go.
What does this woman know about dust? What questions is she asking? Is this dust? Is it the same thing making these patterns and moving the needle of the alethiometer?
What were you doing? What were you thinking? What does it mean?
What it says, it's saying in my language, right? The language of pictures, like the alethiometer. But what it says is that it could use ordinary language too. Words, if you fix it up like that. You could fix it so it put words on the screen easy. But you need a lot of careful figuring with numbers. That was the compass, see? And the lightning, that meant anbaric. I mean, electric power. More of that. And the angel, that was all about messages. There's things it wants to say. But when it went on to that second bit, it meant Asia. Almost the furthest east, but not quite. I don't know what country that would be. China, maybe? I think it meant that thing on the wall, but I didn't really understand it. I thought there was something strange about it at first, but I didn't know what. But they have a way in China of talking to dust. Like you got here, and I got with pictures, only their way uses sticks. So I think it meant there must be lots of different ways of talking to dust, or shadows, or whatever you call it.
And those pictures on the screen will...
It says that you're important too. It says you've got something important to do. I don't know what, but it wouldn't say that unless it was true.
Oh, all right, where do you come from?
I come from another world. It's true. I came through to this one. I had to run away because the people in my world, they were chasing me to kill me. And the alethiometer comes from the same place. The master of Jordan College gave it to me. In my Oxford, there's a Jordan College, but there ain't one here. I looked. And I found out how to read the alethiometer by myself. What I want to know is, why do the people in my world hate it? Dust, I mean shadows, dark matter. They want to destroy it. They think it's evil, but I think what they do is evil. I've seen them do it. So what is it? Shadows. Is it good or evil or what?
Do you know how embarrassing it is to mention good and evil in a scientific laboratory? One of the reasons I became a scientist was not to have to think about that kind of thing.
You've got to think about it. You can't investigate dust or shadows or whatever it is without thinking about that sort of thing, good and evil and such. And it said you got to, remember? You can't refuse. You've got to fix the engine to put words on the screen instead of pictures like I made. And you can find out all about dust or shadows and tell me. You see, the alethiometer doesn't exactly tell me what I need to know, but you can find out for me.
So you're going? Well, you've given me a strange hour, no mistake.
Are you going to make it do words?
Listen, I want you to come back tomorrow. Can you do that? About the same time. I want you to show someone else.
Well, all right, but remember, there's things I need to know.
Yes, of course. You will come.
If I say I will, I will. I could help you, I expect.
There was not much traffic in the high street, and when they turned down the steps opposite Magdalen College towards the gate of the Botanic Garden, they were completely alone. There was an ornate gateway with stone seats inside it, and Will and Lyra climbed over the iron fence into the garden itself. Their demons slipped through the bars and flowed ahead of them into the garden. "It's this way," said Lyra, tugging at Will's hand. She led him past a pool with a fountain under a wide-spreading tree, and then struck off to the left between beds of plants towards a huge many-trunked pine. There was a massive stone wall with a doorway in it, and in the further part of the garden, the trees were younger and the planting less formal. Lyra led him almost to the end of the garden, over a little bridge to a wooden seat under a spreading, low-branched tree. "Yes," she said. "I hoped so much, and here it is, just the same. Well, I used to come here in my Oxford and sit on this exact same bench whenever I wanted to be alone, just me and Pan. What I thought was that if you, maybe just once a year, if we could come here at the same time, just for an hour or something, then we could pretend we were close again. Because we would be close if you sat here and I sat just here in my world." "Yes," he said. "As long as I live, I'll come back. Wherever I am in the world, I'll come back here on Midsummer's Day," she said, "at midday. As long as I live. As long as I live." He found himself unable to see, but he let the hot tears flow and just held her close. "And if we, later on," she was whispering shakily, "if we meet someone that we like, and if we marry them, then we must be good to them and not make comparisons all the time and wish we were married to each other instead. But just keep up this coming here once a year, just for an hour. Just to be together." They held each other tightly. Minutes passed. A water bird on the river beside them stirred and called. The occasional car moved over Magdalen Bridge. Finally, they drew apart. "Well," said Lyra softly. Everything about her in that moment was soft, and that was one of his favorite memories later on. Her tense grace made tender by the dimness, her eyes and her hands and especially her lips infinitely soft. He kissed her again and again, and each kiss was nearer to the last one of all. Heavy and soft with love, they walked back to the gate. "Lyra," Will said, and she said, "Will." He cut a window into Cittàgazze. They were deep in the parkland around the great house, not far from the edge of the forest. They stepped through for the last time and looked down over the silent city, the tiled roofs gleaming in the moonlight, the tower above them, the lighted ship waiting out on the still sea. Will stepped through the last window, back into his own world, in the shade of the trees of the Botanic Garden. Being cheerful starts now. Will thought as hard as he could, but it was like trying to hold a fighting wolf still in his arms when it wanted to claw at his face and tear out his throat. Nevertheless, he did it, and he thought no one could see the effort it cost him. And he knew that Lyra was doing the same, and that the tightness and strain in her smile were the sign of it. Nevertheless, she smiled. One last kiss, rushed and clumsy so that they banged cheekbones, and a tear from her face was transferred to his face. Their two demons kissed farewell, and Pantalaimon flowed over the threshold and up into Lyra's arms. And then Will began to close the window. And then it was done. The way was closed. Lyra was gone.
Blackwell, now called Lyra Silvertongue, lay along the windowsill of Lyra's little study bedroom in St. Sophia's College in a state as far from thought as he could get. He was aware of the cold draught from the ill-fitting window beside him, and of the warm naphtha light on the desk below the window, and of the scratching of Lyra's pen, and of the darkness outside. It was the cold and the dark he wanted most just then. As he lay there, turning over to feel the cold now on his back, now on his front, the desire to go outside became even stronger than his reluctance to speak to Lyra. "Open the window," he said finally. "I want to go out." Lyra's pen stopped moving. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Pantalaimon could see her reflection in the glass, suspended over the Oxford night. He could even make out her expression of mutinous unhappiness. "I know what you're going to say," he said. "Of course I'll be careful. I'm not stupid." "In some ways you are," she said. She reached over him and slid the window up, propping it open with the nearest book. "Don't," he began. "Don't shut the window, yes. Pan, just sit there freezing till Pan decides to come home. I'm not stupid at all. Go on, bugger off." He flowed out and into the ivy covering the wall of the college. Only the faintest rustle came to Lyra's ears, and then only for a moment. Pan didn't like the way they were speaking to each other, or rather not speaking. In fact, these words were the first they'd exchanged all day. But he didn't know what to do about it, and neither did she.
Those were absolutely beautiful readings, and I hope you'll join me in a round of applause for the readers we had tonight: Niamh Cusack, Danuta Gohill, Anne-Marie Duff, Raffaella Chapman, and Helen Aluko. They have transported us into Lyra's life. My name is Zing, and if you're following us from at home on the live feed, we hope you feel as immersed in Lyra's life as we do here in Alexandra Palace Theatre. And give yourselves a round of applause as well, because you're the lucky ones. You got tickets to the launch. Well done on defeating the Waterstones reservation system. Thank you for joining all of us at Ali Pali. You may have noticed as you came in the BBC tower mast. If you don't know what a tower mast is and you don't understand how TV is beamed into our homes, don't worry about it. You were probably born in the 90s or 2000s. It's not relevant. But for those of you who do know what a TV mast does, it is particularly appropriate because Raffaella and Anne-Marie will both be appearing in the BBC series adaptation of Philip Pullman's books. But we are not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about The Secret Commonwealth, the latest book in the Book of Dust series and the 5th outing for our heroine, Lyra. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the man himself, Philip Pullman. Thank you so much for joining us, Philip. We've got some audience questions that people submitted ahead of time, which I'll be asking and weaving throughout the interview. You don't have to stand up and say it's not question time, thank God. And I'd like to start with a question from Hannah Mooney, which is, why did you want to continue Lyra's journey after the Amber Spyglass all these years later?
Well, originally, I didn't think I would. But when I was writing His Dark Materials, I could see what the ending was going to be, and we've just heard somebody reading beautifully the ending, and I thought that was it. But as the years since then, it was nearly 20 years ago now, good Lord, went by, I kept on thinking about Lyra and the fact that she's growing up, because this is not one of those stories in which characters stay the same age throughout. After all, the central event, really, in His Dark Materials is Lyra and Will, too, growing up, leaving innocence behind and entering the world of, grown-upness and experience, from innocence to experience, in the terms of William Blake. And I wondered what she'd be doing, because it must have been kind of frustrating for her to have had the greatest adventure of her life and then go home again. It's all over. What'd she do for the rest of her life? And I don't think she's the sort of person to just accept that. So the next story began to take shape in my mind. And I was also intrigued by this business of dust. What is dust? What does it mean? Because that question's never answered in His Dark Materials. So for those reasons and various other reasons, that ideas that came to me, images that intrigued me, places I wanted her to go to, I started to write the Book of Dust.
And why did you situate, The Secret Commonwealth opens when she's in her early 20s, or if not 20. Why that age particularly? Because it's such an interesting age. She's kind of stopped being a teenager, but she's not quite a grown-up yet.
Exactly. Well, I wanted to show her, first of all, as a student, studying things she's interested in, finding other things to be curious about, intellectually curious. I wanted to show her at that age, and also because it's about 10 years, maybe a bit less, since the end of the Amber Spyglass, and I thought the world around her would be changing in ways that would eventually impinge on her life and on her story. So that seemed to be the right sort of age.
And she's quite a different person when we encounter her. I was quite surprised because she's not really the gutsy, courageous girl that we remember from the Amber Spyglass. She's quite melancholy. She's quite serious. She's quite a lot like a university undergraduate.
Yes, well, we're all melancholy when we're at Oxford or Cambridge. That was what was interesting for me. During the course of the Amber Spyglass, she and Pantalaimon discover how to separate. And this is a process that causes them a great deal of suffering, which neither of them ever forgets. And although it's a rare and almost unique talent that she has, she shares it with the witches who can separate from their demons. It does come at a cost. And one of the costs of this is a growing, as we learn from the opening chapter of this, a growing sort of estrangement between them. We see that they're not as close as they have been. And we have to remember, well, I hope we do remember, that the demon is not a pet. It's not a friend. The demon is part of you, part of your very self. And she's feeling estranged from herself, which is something that thinking people, people who are intellectually curious, sometimes do undergo. And it can be an enthralling experience. It can be a frightening experience. It can be an experience of deep sadness. Well, this is one of the things I found I could do with the demon, which remains my best discovery ever. And the story as it unfolds in The Secret Commonwealth dramatizes this growing estrangement between Lyra and a part of herself, which, well, I won't give the whole story away now.
No spoilers.
I want them to buy the book.
Well, Lyra's not the only one who can separate, because Malcolm does it at the end of La Belle Sauvage.
Yeah.
And we've got a question from Rosie, who's age 9, who is the youngest person who submitted a question. How are demons born?
Well, you know how babies are born. Stork comes along and leaves them with the... I don't know. I don't know. People have asked me this question quite often. I have never had to write a scene of a demon being born. If I had, I would find out and know about it. But demon gynecology is a mystery to me. And I think I'll leave it at that, really.
Right. Rosie will have to find out for herself.
Yes.
And how do you go about assigning people their demons in the novels? Do you kind of have an idea of, you know, well, this fellow looks like he'd have a snake or a snail or something, you know? How do you figure out who to assign a demon to?
Well, in the same way that sometimes a character comes to you with their name, Lyra came to me with her name. I didn't make it up. I just discovered she was called Lyra. In a similar sort of way, I could see almost at once what form the character's demon would take. And of course, it does express a certain quality about the person. If your demon happened to be a snake, it wouldn't mean that you were evil or poisonous or venomous. It would mean that something in your nature was kind of serpentine, subtle, you know, rather than blundering and blunt and aggressive. So it wasn't hard to think of, or rather, as I say, it almost came by itself.
Do you ever meet people in real life and go, I know exactly what demon you'd have?
Yeah, sometimes it's quite easy to see. Politicians are not hard to pin down demon-wise.
Right. I know you've said yourself that your demon would be a raven, correct?
Well, so many people asked me about it that I had to sort of look for her and find out what she was. And I think the kind of bird that steals things, those family, you know, the corvid family, crows, rooks, magpies, ravens, jackdaws, that's the kind of bird that suits me, because I and many storytellers do steal things. We're always on the lookout for something that's shiny and interesting and we can put into a story. So that's what I think she is.
We've got a question from Scott Bailey, who asked, my question is, if you could be a demon for a historically famous person, who would you choose and what would you be?
Oh, well, that's a question I've never heard before. Historically. Well, there are all sorts of people in history that I'm curious about. I often wonder what it would be like to go back in history with a camera and take a picture of someone who lived before the age of photography. It would be interesting to see what Shakespeare really looked like, or Julius Caesar, or Cleopatra. Well, actually, Shakespeare's quite a good. I think I'd like to go back and be Shakespeare's demon. I think she would be a bird too. I don't know what gives me. Perhaps a nightingale. Perhaps not a stealing bird.
Well, I wouldn't put it past Shakespeare.
Well, no. Of course, he took a lot of his plots from other sources. Yeah, we're all at it.
Well, that's what makes you such successful writers. So demons are kind of, as I understand them, so creatures of magic. And I think the interesting thing about this new book is that Lyra's slowly becoming kind of more rational, and she's discovered all these authors, I'm trying very hard not to spoil things for all of you, who have kind of given her a new perspective on life. And she's much more interested in logic and rationality than she used to be. She's kind of losing her sense of wonder.
Yeah.
And that's kind of at the heart of the rift between her and Pan. So I was wondering, is losing your sense of wonder just part and parcel of growing up?
For some people, it seems to be, yeah. I'd locate it in something that William Blake calls single vision. Blake, as we know, and anybody who's been to that wonderful exhibition that's on at the moment, as anybody who's seen that will know, Blake was a visionary. He saw things, and he was particularly interested, especially interested in the nature of vision, what vision was, whether it's just seeing something, like a tree or a table or something, or whether it's a bit more than that. Single vision is the kind of vision that only sees the things that can be measured. A recent book, which I found very interesting, by the philosopher Philip Goff, calls this Galileo's error, because he pinpoints Galileo's work as being the moment when science really got going, but it also separated itself from feeling and emotion and imagination. Because Galileo declared that science is about what can be measured. You can weigh this, you can measure it. We can talk about that, but we can't really talk about, in science, we can't talk about the other things. And if you become a little obsessed with this, you forget that there are other ways of being true than just being measurable. And this is kind of what's happened to Lyra. And I'm very interested in this process. It's part of her intellectual curiosity. It's part of growing up. It's one of the ways we come to find out and discover who we are and what we really believe. And I wanted to examine that process and see what it involves.
Did you ever go through that period in your life yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever get over it?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. There are all sorts of ways of depicting this. I won't list them here, but I think it's a necessary process. We have to leave behind the beliefs that we accepted unquestioningly when we were children. We have to look at the world in a different way, perhaps a scientific way, perhaps a rational way. And some people do that and very successfully live like that and manage to live according to reason and so on. But I think the reason, to use the old phrase, rationality, is a good servant but a bad master. If you live all your life according to nothing but reason, you'd never fall in love. You'd come to believe that old people who are not economically productive anymore serve no purpose, and we'd be better off by killing them all. Reason on its own is a kind of devilish thing. So in William Blake's terms, single vision is the enemy. And of course, single vision can have a religious dimension as well, which is what I was criticizing, or which is what His Dark Materials was criticizing.
Right, so orthodoxy, pretty much.
any power, any political power that rules in the name of something that cannot be questioned is extremely dangerous. The will of the people.
Single vision indeed.
Indeed.
The Secret Commonwealth doesn't just focus entirely on Lyra, obviously, so Will weighs very heavily on her mind. And there's a question from Chihoi Ha, which is that Will is such a beloved character in the book series. Is there any chance we'll see him again in this series, or even in a spin-off of his own?
Oh, you can't ask me to tell you what's going to happen later. I like Will too. I'm very, very fond of Will. I know what happened. I know what happens to him. I know what his career is going to be. I can probably tell you that he's going to be a doctor. But whether we have a sight of that, I can't tell you yet.
Noted. Have you plotted out endings for all the characters?
No, I don't. I tend not to plot things out because I want to discover things as they do. Very early on, when I was really starting out as a writer, I thought I should plan the novel I was going to write. So I made a really good plan. Took me months, chapter by chapter, incident by incident, character by character, lists of what they were like and where they were. And then I stopped and I thought, God, I'm bored. This is appallingly tedious. And I threw it away and I started a book with no idea what was going to happen, and it was much better. And I've done that ever since.
Did you ever continue writing the book you threw away that you plotted? Or is it just in the
No, I can't even remember anything about it.
And across the series, of course, the characters are changing and evolving. And what I found really interesting about the people who asked questions from the audience is that there were quite a few who wanted to know more about Lord Asriel. So Megan Rofe and Daniela Major both kind of had similar questions about Lyra's father. So they've pinpointed that in La Belle Sauvage, he seems to care for Lyra. He cares about where she ends up. But by the time you get to the Amber Spyglass, he's quite distant and aloof. So what was happening between these books? And did your feelings about him just change over time?
I think what was happening to Asriel is similar to what had been happening to Mrs. Coulter. One of the reasons I was sorry they didn't go on and make all 3 films after The Golden Compass was that I wanted to see Nicole Kidman inhabit the role of Mrs. Coulter, who is gradually realizing that against her will, against her nature, against everything she wants to do, she is finding herself loving Lyra more and more. And finally, she sacrifices herself, as does Asriel. I think in his different way, he's probably finding the same thing. They have this daughter who is a nuisance, who is a problem, who's causing them both immense difficulties and threatening to destroy everything they've worked for. But they love her. They can't help it. It's growing and growing. She can probably express it more fully than he can, but she never has time to. I think that's what's happening. As you say, in La Belle Sauvage, we see that scene where, in the moonlight, he comes to see her as a baby and walks up and down in the bare orchard of the priory, whispering to her. I like that scene, and I like what it showed us about him. But there weren't any more pages.
I think also what that shows us is that children are much easier to get on with when they're babies, as opposed to...
Once you deal with various functions concerned with food and digestion, yes, they're a lot easier to deal with.
Elsie and Luca, who are 14 years old, they wanted to know which character do you think you're most like?
Well, I'd like to say one of the heroic ones, of course. There are characters I'm very fond of. I'm very fond of Lee Scoresby. I'm very fond in a different way of Father Coram. And so, but I don't think I'm particularly like them. What I am, my function, me, sorry, I keep bashing my microphone, I'm sorry if I'm the narrator, or rather, I'm the author, and the narrator is a character who tells us about what's happening in the story. That's the character that interests me most. It's the character I enjoy inhabiting most. The narrator used to be called the omniscient narrator because it seems as if the narrator knows everything and can tell you everything about all the characters. I don't think the narrator does know everything, but I think he and she, know more than they tell us, but they probably don't know everything. And if you think about this character, the omniscient narrator, or simply the narrator who can tell us what Lyra's thinking and what Malcolm's thinking and what's going on in Geneva meanwhile among the magisterium, the character who can do that can't be a human being, because human beings can't do that. So the narrator must be some kind of sprite. And I love inhabiting that sprite.
Have you ever based any of the characters on real-life people, historical figures? So I guess, for instance, Lord Asriel is the kind of rebellious, revolutionary type who wants to upturn everything. Did you find yourself basing him on anyone who existed in real life?
Well, I mean, he is the figure in this story that Satan is in Paradise Lost, the rebel, the one who destroys the settled order of things in order to, and so on. People ask me if Lyra is based on any child in particular. Well, no, not a child in particular, but I used to teach children of her age. And I think in every class I ever taught there was a Lyra or someone like that. And as for Will, his situation at the beginning of The Subtle Knife, where he's his mother's carer, in effect, she's mentally unstable because various things have caused it, but he realizes that if she's sort of taken into a hospital, he will have to go into care and he'll be separated from her, and he thinks he understands what her problem is and that he's the only one who can really look after her, in which he's probably right. So he has to live in a very difficult way for a 12-year-old boy. He has to look after his mother, make sure she's fed, make sure that she's safe, go to school, not get into trouble, because that would mean he'd be in detention or something and he wouldn't get home and be able to look. So it's a very difficult situation. But there are children who do live like this. And I admire and respect them beyond words because of their courage and their ability to bear this huge burden without complaining. So, yeah, both Lyra and Will are based on real people, but there are many people like Lyra and like Will.
What were the Lyras and the Wills in your classes like to teach? I'm assuming the Lyras must have been harder.
Yeah, they were very noisy. They were kind of obstreperous. They were difficult, but they did enjoy showing off. They enjoyed it when I put on a play, and they would clamor for the best part. But they were very rewarding to teach. And that made the whole business of being a teacher and having to go to school bearable, really. Couldn't do it now. I couldn't do it. I couldn't teach in the way they have to teach now, with these SATs and the minute instructions they have to follow and the forms they have to fill out. And I'd sooner go out into the rain and dig potatoes out of the ground with my bare hands than be a teacher now.
So you're not up for teaching a 7-year-old what a preposition is?
Well, there are ways of doing it that are interesting, and there are ways of doing it that are rewarding, and there are ways of doing it that come at the right time. And an experienced teacher, an imaginative teacher, will know this and can convey what a preposition is, or a subordinate clause, or something, painlessly and interestingly. It's not easy. It takes skill, it takes experience, it takes imagination, it takes those sort of qualities. It certainly does not involve following a detailed set of instructions about fronted adverbials or something. Doing well.
I think we've got some teachers in the audience tonight.
Yeah.
Do you think your background as a teacher lent anything to you becoming an author?
I know I would have written, I was writing anyway. What my time as a teacher did allow me to do, and wouldn't now because of the way it has to be done, what it allowed me to do was tell stories. I thought it would be a good idea, and this is the way we could teach then. We thought, if this is a good idea, if it's something they'd benefit from knowing, we'd teach them about it. I thought it would be a good idea if the children I taught had heard some of the great myths from Greece and Rome in particular, because they were the ones I knew best. So I told them. These great stories over and over and over. Well, when I said not for the same children over and over, they each had the story of Jason and the Argonauts once, but I told them over and over to many different classes, with the result that I learned a huge amount about storytelling. I learned what I could do well and what I couldn't do very well. I learned how to time a story so that the most exciting point came just as the bell went, and they didn't want to go out for break, but they had to.
Leave them wanting more.
So I was extremely lucky to teach at that time, and in the schools I taught in. I was very lucky.
That really brings me on to one of the other questions that someone submitted from Mylene Valley. And she talks about how in His Dark Materials, did you add or remove anything that could have changed the story dramatically? So for instance, I know that you wrote a first chapter with no demons in it. And was there ever a potential end to His Dark Materials where the passageway still existed between Will and Lyra's worlds?
Well, it's always very tempting to have a happy ending. Mm-hmm. And it's always very tempting to sort of think of, and they lived happily ever after. But the story wouldn't have worked. It works much better when people wish it were otherwise. It works because it's a sad parting at the end. So, no, I'm completely ruthless about this. Let them cry.
Is this the novel equivalent of leaving them wanting more in class?
Well, exactly, that's part of it, yeah.
I know you mentioned you don't necessarily plot everything out. So have you ever written yourself into a corner and thought, how do I get out of this now?
Oh, frequently, yes. You just turn to the next page and write chapter 7 and start a new chapter. The answer will come, in a few days' time. Yes, I mean, more seriously, yes, I've written endless loops like a billabong, which is a bit of the river that's cut off because the mainstream didn't want to go that way, it wanted to go this way. So I had to go back to the point where it diverged and follow the mainstream. But yes, that happens all the time.
You've got 4 books out now, so, with the 5th one. So has there ever been anything you've looked back on that you've already published and thought, I wish I hadn't written that in because now it's made my life difficult?
No. When you write a story that's in several volumes, you can always tie up the loose ends you can always think you will. But then all your loose ends come home to roost finally, and you have to sort them out. No, I like telling a long story, and sometimes it's easy to sort out, and sometimes it isn't. But you keep on trying.
In The Secret Commonwealth, there are lots of touches I find so contemporary. So for instance, we see refugees arriving onto Greek islands and Lyra witnesses them landing. Did you intend to make a point of including these kind of contemporary touchstones, or did they just arise organically out of the story you were trying to tell?
It was like that. I didn't intend to, but I live in the world. I read the news. I watch these pictures on television of things happening in various places, and of course I'm touched by it. I'm a part of the world. It's inevitable that things that I notice, I feel strongly about, are going to find their way into the story. It would be odd if it didn't, really. And also it would be very unfulfilling, because if I were writing a story that had no connection at all with the life that I live and my readers live, it would be it wouldn't work.
Do you think fantasy is a useful genre to do that in? Because obviously there's a little bit of a distance between the world as we live in it now and the world that Lyra lives in. So you can almost afford to be more compassionate or truthful about the reality of things.
I was never a reader of fantasy, really. I don't read it much now. And the reason I don't much care for most fantasy is that most fantasy isn't interested in most people. Somebody said that about poetry. As soon as we leave here, I'll remember who that was.
You can tweet it afterwards.
But most fantasy seems more interested in dragons and swords and magic prophecies and things like that. I'm interested in what makes us human beings. And I thought I could see in fantasy a way of talking about that without writing a realistic novel. I know I'm not much good at realism. I'm too lazy. It's much easier to sit at your desk and make it up than go and find things out. And living where I do in Oxford, there's someone who knows, the world's expert on everything just down the road, and I can go and see them and ask. But I do think fantasy is kind of underrated as a way of exploring psychology. I know there are some fine novels, science fiction sort, really. Solaris, that extraordinary story, does that. But not as many seem to use it for that purpose as could.
And one of the interesting things about The Secret Commonwealth, I think, is the existence of The Secret Commonwealth itself. So, for people who are kind of wondering where this title comes from, could you just sort of briefly explain what it is? Because
yes, of course. The Secret Commonwealth is a very good title because I stole it, and I stole it from a book whose full title, I got it in the back, let me see, whose full title is The Secret Commonwealth, or an essay on the nature and actions of the subterranean, and for the most part invisible people, heretofore going under the names of fauns and fairies or the like, among the Low Country Scots, as described by those who have second sight. Now, that's a good title, but a long one. It's a little book that was written in the latter part of the 17th century by a Scottish clergyman called Robert Kirk. And he was writing about the stories and the legends and the folk tales he'd heard among the people he was working among and he'd grown up with. The Secret Commonwealth is that part of our lives that we can't fully explain. It's where ghosts are. It's where flying saucers are, I suppose. It's where trolls and elves and things like that live. And I'm struck by how prevalent that world still is. In Iceland, for example, a few years ago, they were building a new road. And the local people said, no, you can't knock that hill down. That's where the troll lives. So they said, okay, then we'll divert it this way. And quite rightly, too.
Very considerate.
Yes. We'll find out more in the third book, how the secret Commonwealth works and where it is and what it means.
I know when you were writing his Dark Materials, you got this reputation for being very anti-religion, anti-spirituality, but it seems like it's slightly softening in this series.
Well, this is what I mean by single vision, and rationality being a good servant. It's a wonderful servant. It discovers things for you that you'd never find out otherwise, but it doesn't tell us about the secret Commonwealth, which is where a lot of our lives is led.
Well, I think it's the part that gives meaning to it.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things I found about the book is that it goes even deeper into Lyra's world, and you end up exploring new countries, new empires that you've never been to before in the series. So you've got a question from Mike and Heather in Dunblane, who have been assiduously reading all the books to prepare for the Secret Commonwealth.
Oh, good.
And they say the sheer complexity of the world you put together is mesmerizing, but it sticks to good old-fashioned storytelling. So how do you go about the process of creating a world, and how do you restrain yourself from just describing the way a shelf looks or, you know, the lay of the land, to just keep the story going and to keep things gripping?
Well, it's partly storyteller's experience. If you spend too much time describing the appearance of something and it doesn't help the story, that's the point at which people close the book and turn the telly on. So it's partly that. It's also, what was the first part of that question?
Well, they said, well, first they complimented you.
Oh, yeah.
They said the sheer...
I always hear that again.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you go about the process of creating a world?
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, firstly, I'm not writing a computer game. I'm telling a story, and I'm the boss. I'm in charge. I decide that we will go this way rather than that, because this way is where the story goes. What I mean by that is, I describe this bit as much as I need to, but the bit where we don't go, I don't have to fill it all in. I don't have to make sure, well, you know, if they choose to go right instead of left at that point, what are they going to see there? Oh, let's have a church, and then there's a house, and then a village pond, and then... I don't have to do that, because I'm directing the way the story goes. So if you were to make a computer game out of this book, or any of my books really, it would consist of one path, and you follow that path, and you're not allowed to go anywhere else. Because you see what you see when you go backstage in a theatre. You see great struts holding it up, and the back of canvas flats, and things like that. So, in a way, it's easy.
Have you ever been approached to turn it into a computer game?
No, I say no. No. Oh, you can make a film out of it, you can make a TV show out of it, you can make a stage play, or radio, you can do all those things, but it's not going to be a game.
I know you've said before you don't write for particular audiences, and you've never thought of this as a children's book series, but I think one of the most notable things about The Secret Commonwealth is that it feels more grown up. And I remember coming across the first F word in the book and being like, oh my God. Things have changed.
You should see what I cut out.
Yeah, really. Well, there's a great description of Lyra attempting to explain the meaning of the word bullshit.
Yeah.
Which is not something that would have happened in his Dark Materials, I don't think.
No, it is a more grown-up book, I suppose, because the characters themselves have grown up. You know, she's 20, Malcolm's 30 or something. It would be absurd to have them reacting childishly and putting them in situations that are likely to happen to children. They're grown up. And I think I can see from the people who came to the events I did for the La Belle Sauvage that a lot of them, in fact the majority of them, are grown up. They're people who perhaps read his Dark Materials when they were young, but who are now in their 20s, 30s themselves, and they know what it's like to grow up, and maybe they'll be interested to see how Lyra grows up.
And those people who have, you know, grown up with his Dark Materials, who are probably most of the audience here tonight, how do you feel when you meet them and they tell you that your books were such a huge part of their childhood and growing up?
Well, I'm very touched. I'd say I was flattered, but it isn't flattery. They're not trying to flatter me. I'm very gratified to find that I've managed to tell a story that has moved people, affected them, made them think perhaps in a slightly different way. I'm immensely pleased to have done that, and as I say, I'm very lucky.
I know you must have met dozens of Lyras. I'm fairly sure there's some Lyras in the audience now. Have you ever met anyone who was named after another character in the books? Ever met Elise Scoresby?
No. No, I haven't. I know there are Lyras, and the latest Lyra to arrive in the world is Michael Sheen's new baby. He's called her Lyra, and I find that delightful. He reads the audio book. He did La Belle Sauvage, and we talked about that afterwards, and he said that the most difficult bit was doing a scene where 3 Swedish old men are talking together. So I thought, right, I'll give you 6 Hungarians in the next one. But I forgot. I didn't give him 6 Hungarians.
I think there are 3 Welshmen, though.
Oh, well, he can do Welsh.
Yeah.
He is Welsh.
Easy, not a challenge. 6 Hungarians in the next book.
I'm saving them for something else.
What can you tell us about the final book in the series? Will you attempt to draw everything to a conclusion, or are you going to leave them wanting more?
Well, I hope they'll always want more. But we can see where the story's going in this book. It's going towards Central Asia. It involves roses, or some particular roses. And it involves dust. That's really all I can tell you. I haven't even got a title for it yet. But titles are difficult things. Either titles come at once, even before the book does, or you have to spend a long, long time working out what they are. Northern Lights was like that. I didn't know what to call that. The Subtle Knife was easier. La Belle Sauvage was very easy. The Secret Commonwealth, I just pinched it, so that was easy. But I don't know what the third book's going to be.
What were some of the alternative titles for Northern Lights?
Well, one of them was a quotation from Paradise Lost. And it's talking about God's creation of the world. He took the golden compasses, not golden compass, he took the golden compasses prepared in God's eternal store to circumscribe the universe and all created things. It's like that drawing William Blake, The Ancient of Days. So I called it the golden compasses. But then I found his dark materials in another line of Paradise Lost, and I realized that's the perfect title for the whole series. And I didn't really like the golden compasses. It didn't express very much. But my American publisher decided that it should be called the Golden Compass because he thought I was referring to the alethiometer, which is why in the States it's called the Golden Compass and why the film was called the Golden Compass, and I don't like that title at all. It's funny. In some countries it's called Northern Lights, as it is in Spain. In other countries it's called the Golden Compass, as it is in Germany. In France it's called something quite different.
Oh, really?
Yeah, à la croisée des mondes, at the crossing place of the worlds.
Very French.
And in Northern Lights it's called les royaumes du Nord, or the kingdoms of the North. But that's the French for you.
What is the French translation of this title?
I don't know. They haven't got a word for Commonwealth. And I haven't seen the translation yet, so they're going to have trouble with that.
I'm sure they'll get around it. I know at Oxford you thought you were going to be a poet and not a writer of fiction. So what do you think caused you to make the jump to fiction?
I wasn't any good at writing poetry. No, poetry was the first kind of language that I fell in love with as a young boy, quite a young boy, and then as a teenager I discovered modern poetry, T.S. Eliot and the Beats, Allen Ginsberg and so on. And I was absolutely thrilled by all that. And then along came Bob Dylan, who was singing the stuff as well. And I had a guitar, and I tried to be Bob Dylan for a bit, but that didn't work. I also tried to be Dylan Thomas for a while, and that didn't really work. And eventually I saw that the stuff I was producing that had poetic form was derivative in a way I didn't want it to be. And in any case, I was always interested in stories and in saying what happened next and leaving them wanting more, as you say. So I started writing novels.
How did you know when you discovered your voice, when you alighted on a way of speaking and a way of writing that felt most natural to you? Because I'm sure there's lots of people in the audience who are writers or aspiring writers themselves.
Well, the book I first found my voice with is a book called The Ruby in the Smoke, which I wrote in the late 70s, mid-70s, something like that. It's a sort of Victorian thriller, melodramatic thriller. And I found that the voice I was inhabiting to tell that story was the one I described earlier, you know, the omniscient voice that isn't quite omniscient, but can comment on the characters as well as saying what they did or thought or felt. Tense has a lot to do with this. It's much harder to do that in the present tense. That's why I find reading books that are written in the present tense rather narrow, really. You know those Venetian blinds that go up rather than across?
Yeah.
So if they're sort of like that, you can't see out of them, and like that you can. Well, that's rather like the present tense, because you can only see what's ahead of you. You can't see what's been or what's coming. Yes, The Ruby in the Smoke and the other books about Sally Lockhart were the first time I found a voice that I was really happy with.
And, you know, Lyra is in her 20s during The Secret Commonwealth. What were you like when you were in your 20s?
I was still trying to write poetry. I hadn't quite sussed it out yet, but that wasn't what I should be doing. I was vague and dreamy and no doubt conceited, intolerably conceited. But I was diligent. I kept trying. And all through the different kinds of jobs I had and the eventual 10 or 12 years I had as a teacher, I didn't stop writing. So I suppose the thing that I learned was the most important thing, was habit. Get into the habit of writing. Get so far into the habit that you feel more uncomfortable if you're not writing than if you are. But if you go to bed without writing your daily stint, you feel a bit shifty. And it doesn't matter whether it's any good or not. This is the other odd thing. You know, people talk about inspiration, and people go on writing courses because they want to be inspired. Well, forget about that. Just write. Just write every day. If you eventually learn to write well enough, inspiration will come. But don't rely on inspiration. And don't use that other thing that amateur writers are so interested in, writer's block. Don't use that as an excuse. Doctors don't get doctor's block.
You'd hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. Yes, that's right. Sometimes it's very difficult. Well, I've got a remedy for when it's very difficult. Go straight into dialogue. Hello. That's one line. Oh, hello. It's 2 lines. How are you doing? Oh, not so bad. Yourself? Well, you know, comes and goes. Before you know where you are, you've written a page. And you're going to cross it out later. Of course you are. But it gets the pen flowing and the machinery starts creaking into action again.
The gears start grinding.
Yeah.
We've got just about enough time for you to read a passage from
Okay.
The Secret Commonwealth. So
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's dying to listen to what the book is like.
Well, we heard the very first pages a little earlier on, with Pan going out on his own and leaving Lyra discontentedly scribbling an essay. Now, what Pan discovers as he goes out forms the motor of the whole plot. He sees someone being murdered. And the dying man sees Pan and tells him to take his wallet, hide it before they come back and kill him. So Pan does. And then he takes it to Lyra. This is about 4 minutes in reading. I saw Charles Causley doing a poetry reading once. I was very impressed because before every poem he'd say, "This poem is about that long." Or, "Next poem is 3 pages long, but it's very narrow." So this takes about 4 minutes. There you are. They turned on the gas fire in Lyra's study bedroom at St. Sophia's, sat at the table and switched on the little lamp. Lyra took out the wallet. It was a simple one-fold wallet without a clasp, the whole thing little bigger than her palm. There'd originally been a raised grain in the leather, like that of Morocco, but most of that was worn away to a greasy smoothness. It might once have been brown, too, but it was nearly black now, and marked in several places by Pan's gripping teeth. She could smell it, a faint, slightly pungent, slightly spicy smell, like that of a man's cologne mixed with sweat. Pan waved a paw in front of his nose. She examined the outside carefully for any mark or monogram, but there was none. She opened the wallet and again found it perfectly normal, perfectly ordinary. There were 4 banknotes, $6 and 100 francs in all, not a large sum. In the next pocket in the wallet, she found a grubby and much-handled identity card with a photogram showing the face of a man of possibly 40 with black curly hair and a thin moustache. "That's him," Pan said. "That's the dead man." The card had been issued by His Majesty's Foreign Office to Anthony John Roderick Hassel, who was a British citizen and whose birth date showed him to be 38 years old. Pan gazed at the picture with intense interest and pity. The next thing she found was a card issued by the University Department of Botany. It certified Dr. Roderick Hassel as a member of staff of the Department of Plant Sciences. "Why would they want to attack him?" Lyra said. "Did he look rich, or was he carrying something, or what?" "They did say," Pan said, trying to remember, "one of them, the killer, he was surprised that the man wasn't carrying a bag. It sounded as if they'd been expecting him to, but he wasn't carrying anything." The next paper Lyra found was much folded and refolded and reinforced with tape along the creases. It was headed, "Laissez passer." "What's that?" said Pan. "Kind of passport, I think." It had been issued by the Ministry of Internal Security of the Sublime Porte of the Ottoman Empire at Constantinople. It said in French, English, and Anatolian that Anthony John Roderick Hassel, botanist of Oxford, Britain, was to be allowed to travel through the realms of the Ottoman Empire, and that the authorities were to give him assistance and protection whenever needed. "How big is the Ottoman Empire?" said Pan. "Enormous. Turkey and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt and Libya and thousands of miles east as well, I think. Wait, there's something else in here." Her fingers had found another paper hidden in an inside pocket. She tugged it out and unfolded it to find something quite different from the rest, a leaflet from a steamship company advertising a cruise to the Levant on a vessel called the SS Zenobia. It was issued by the Imperial Orient Line, and the English language text promised a world of romance and sunshine. "A world of silks and perfumes," Pan read, "of carpets and sweetmeats, of damascened swords, of the glint of beautiful eyes beneath the star-filled sky. Dance to the romantic music of Carlo Pommerini and his Salon Serenade Orchestra," Lyra read. "Thrill to the whisper of moonlight on the tranquil waters of the..." How can moonlight whisper? It's ridiculous. Wait, Pan, look. On the back there was a timetable showing the dates of arrival and departure at various ports. Someone had circled the date Monday, May the 11th, when the Zenobia called at Smyrna, and drawn a line from that to the scribbled words Café Antalya, Suleiman Square, 11 a.m. "An appointment," said Pan. "And it's this year too." "Well," said Lyra, we really ought to take this to the police. I mean, there's no doubt about that, is there?" "I suppose not," said Pan. He turned the papers round to read them more closely. Is that everything in the wallet? I think so, Lyra looked through again, pushing her fingers down into the pockets. No, wait, there's something here. A coin? She turned the wallet upside down and shook it. It wasn't a coin that fell out, but a key with a round metal tag attached to it, bearing the number 36. That looks like, said Pan. Yes, we've seen one of those. We've had one of those. When was it? Last year, at the railway station. Left luggage, Lyra said. He put something in a left luggage locker. The bag they thought he ought to be carrying. Must be still there. They looked at each other with wide eyes.
So I think we're going to leave you wanting more. I'm sure many of you are going to stay up all night reading this book, so we won't stop you. That's all the time we have tonight, so please join me in thanking the people who read earlier for us and Philip Pullman.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the book. Hope you enjoy the book, or at least buy it. Good night.